Hello, my name is Graciela Lee, and I'm currently a sophomore at Texas Tech University majoring in political science. The focus of my recent inquiry has been to study the interpretation of Niccolo Machiavelli's 16th century political theories and their subsequent influence on contemporary 20th and 21st century leaders. To start, we should begin at the root of my inquiry, which was first to question, do Machiavelli's Renaissance political theories still hold relevance to the present political arena? To this, I would argue that yes, they do. Machiavelli was a greatly reputed diplomat in the Florentine Republic, working as such for just under 2 decades before the Medici family's exile ended, and Machiavelli was forced to begin his. A victim of regime change, he was tortured on suspicion of treason and eventually forced to leave his diplomatic post in Florence. Following this was the time period in which he wrote The Prince, a book primarily concerned with the art of war and statecraft. Machiavelli's many years navigating the turbulent political sphere of Renaissance Italy meant that he possessed extraordinary insight into the workings of politics at the time. The Prince is essentially the concise and immoral culmination of this experience, in which Machiavelli describes the qualities and necessary actions a prince must have and take to both become a ruler and maintain sovereignty. In many ways, Machiavelli outlined what we may consider to be an absolute ruler or an authoritarian. Throughout my investigation into the persevering applicability of his advice, I had great success in finding continuity from Machiavelli's analysis of authoritarian figures in The Prince onto authoritarian figures of the modern era. However, a certain quality of his work that's not heavily written on is what I see to be a populist lens exhibited in his writing as he describes the relationship between a prince and his people. The populist ideology is an amorphous one. There's no strict definition to identify it by, only a few essential characteristics. With any populist political actor, an emphasis on the pure people versus the corrupt elites is quintessential to their platform. Populist rhetoric will prey on the fears and anxieties of people who feel they're being neglected in some way, claiming that only the populace alone can accurately represent their needs and wants within the corrupted system. This tactic seems most potent when the politician at hand calls for the persecution of the corrupt elites, who are most commonly the established government of the nation they reside in, who are accused of orchestrating this offense against the pure people. This aggression against the oppressor of the pure people is strategically used to fuel the emergency felt by them, which serves to bolster their support of the populist platform and lend fervor to defense against critics. Populists in the contemporary era can be recognized by their monopoly on far-right extremist fears, such as globalism, Islam, the liberal agenda, and the mainstream media. Their demand for obedience and adherence to their will from these groups is, at its core, a call to recognize their authority. And as such, an essential quality found in many contemporary populists is that of authoritarianism. This characteristic, as well as that of the people versus the elites, is where the relationship between Machiavelli's notion of the ideal prince and our modern populist authoritarian figures is revealed. In these populists' advocation for their individual power over democratic collectives, they advocate for their dictatorship, making the populist program an essential tool in acquiring the sovereignty over the established government or offending group, and vital in the persistence of the populist power, as such a dictatorship will have its natural opposition, and the populist supporters will be perpetually provoked by the lasting presence of their political opponents. But what makes the relationship between authoritarianism and populists so Machiavellian is that the intersecting ideals of the two are readily mirrored in Machiavelli's theories in The Prince. Machiavelli's conception of the ideal leader could be summarized by his principle of virtù, which was that of a prince's talent and ability to achieve his goals irrespective of his deemed morality. But most telling of his relativity to populist authoritarians is the number of interconnected populist and dictatorial statements expressed throughout The Prince. In chapter 9, he wrote, "A prince can never secure himself against a disaffected people, their number being too great, while he may against a disaffected nobility, since their number is small." Here, the notion of a populist relationship between prince and people is expressed, though in somewhat dated terms, and the hint of an authoritarian relationship between the two is more subtly read as well. The contemporary translation of this sentiment is ripe for application, especially from his concluding chapter, where Machiavelli makes a most notable populist assertion. In Italy, the opportunities are not wanting for thorough reorganization. Here, we would find greater prowess amongst those who follow, were it not lacking among the leaders. The Italians are superior in strength, in skill, in inventiveness, but when it's a matter of armies, they do not compare. All this is because of the weakness of the leaders. The conclusion to follow the evidence given is that Machiavelli possessed populist authoritarian inclinations and that he saw the value in having the support of the pure people in favor of the corrupt elites as means to acquire and perpetuate political power. Such is the appeal of a populist authoritarian platform. Now, in confirming this relationship between Machiavelli's ideals and populist authoritarian ideology, we can see the continuity of his theories stretching from his time of writing, the 16th century, up to the present 21st, significant in that his analyses, being centuries old, have still managed to find themselves applicable to our current political sphere. Most infamously, Benito Mussolini is remembered for his populist authoritarian platform. The interwar period in which his platform rose to power is also perhaps the most remarkable time on the 20th century's political stage, as Mussolini, one of many similar political characters of the era, is widely thought to be the catalyst for modern populist fascism. But what's especially fitting about Mussolini's notorious politics is that Machiavelli's theories on the ideal prince or ideal authoritarian is known to have been studied and cited by Mussolini just before his time as a populist authoritarian leader of Italy, to the extent that he was prepared to write a thesis on Machiavelli's theories for the purpose of obtaining a doctorate. While this was not totally successful, as he was eventually awarded an honorary degree in 1936, he did produce an illuminating paper through which we've been able to isolate his interpretations of Machiavelli's ideals. In his Preludio al Machiavelli, Mussolini wrote, "Machiavelli, in forming this opinion of men, was considering not merely the men of his own time, but men without distinction of time and space." In reference to Machiavelli's critical fixation on man's self-centered nature, Mussolini makes note that he believes this perspective of man to be an essential fact and one that must be remembered. He continues, "The word prince should be understood to mean the state. The state represents organization and limitation. The individual seeks continually to evade restraint. His impulse is to disobey laws, not to pay taxes, not to fight for his country. Rare are the men who are willing to sacrifice their ego on the altar of the common weal. All others are in constant rebellion against the state. The revolutions of the 17th and 18th centuries sought to remove this conflict by making the powers of government proceed from the free will of the people. The people has never been defined. As a political entity, it is pure abstraction." Evidently, in much the same way that Machiavelli remarked on the advantageous use of the people as means for political power, Mussolini does the same, with his writing making particular note of Machiavelli's. The theoretical continuity is thus again highlighted, but beyond that is the practical application of this relationship. Mussolini, a political actor that wasn't exiled beyond his post, was free to entertain whatever political pastime he found enticing. In spouting populist rhetoric that preyed on the people's instability wrought by the First World War, whilst also practically applying Machiavelli's theories, he elevated such fervor that his fascist supporters, known as the Black Shirts, held the March on Rome, an event thought to truly cement Mussolini's authoritarian power. Mussolini had expertly manipulated the language of class conflict alongside nationalist, fascist, and populist rhetoric to weld his populist authoritarian program into government with flair. The outstanding display, ending in great success for the Italian extremists, would soon ignite an intrigue into populist authoritarianism that would explode far beyond just the geographic regions of Western Europe. His near dictatorship, his charisma, his program, and the execution of his ideals can be seen to have been modeled all across the globe in a great number of variations. But most recently, and perhaps with the most notoriety, is that of Donald Trump's interpretation. The 20th century was rife with instability, characterized by advancements in weaponry, economic disasters, the end of empires, and world wars that destroyed any sense of security. It's perfectly clear in surveying such conditions how an overwhelming desperation may have stained the perspectives of those in the midst of it all. Such conditions are model requisites of a populist platform and the perfect feeding ground for any authoritarian to boot. The 21st century, whilst only 21 years old to date, has already been stained by similar circumstances. Forever wars, economic disasters, climate disasters, bipartisan political corruption, and heightened racial tensions are amongst the most commonly cited troubles of our modern era. Such despairs seem of equal proportion to those that plagued the earlier century, and are proving to be equally ripe for exploitation too. The populist rhetoric adopted by Donald Trump at the start of his 2016 presidential run are quite similar to those of Mussolini in the ways that he successfully preyed upon the anxieties of America's right wing, calling upon his supporters to bolster his platform so that he could drain the swamp, or rather, abolish the establishment's oppression of the pure people. In much the same way that Mussolini promised the Italian people a return to the country's glory days before the war, Trump promised to make America great again, and a return to the times before the 2008 recession, before political correctness, before Obama's election sparked a heightened awareness of racial tensions, and back to a time when America wasn't the punching bag of China or Mexico. The grandeur of his hyperbolic slogans was deliberate, as is in any populist platform. His was essentially a call to arms, utilizing nationalist sentiment to amass an army of supporters who wouldn't leave his side even in the most extreme circumstances. The efficacy of this rhetoric, as Trump likely saw in Mussolini's platform, was unmatched. What was theorized to work in the 16th century proved itself in the 20th, and was moreover explosively compelling in the 21st. The power of a cult following is timeless, and its political power incomparable in that under these conditions, the ideals of an individual are transformed into that of a group's, where all are then hegemonized into the single collective will of one man. So, through his study of Mussolini's strategies, we can see a great Machiavellian shadow cast over Trump's politics. But what I want to emphasize here is that this is not a mere coincidence. In our exploration of Trump's association to Machiavelli's theories through his political inspiration, we can draw similar ties to other populist authoritarians of the 21st century. Comparable to Trump's platform are the politics of Berlusconi and his Forza Italia, Erdogan and his glorification of the Ottoman Empire, Bolsonaro's law and order approach to democracy, and Vladimir Putin, who pioneered authoritarian leader worship. There have been a great number of such figures worldwide, all with varying agendas. And in all of these populist authoritarians lies an interconnected chain of relations to Machiavelli's prince and the practices advised they use. Overall, I believe the real strength and impact of my inquiry rests in the connection between these populist authoritarian figures and their ideological origins. On an academic level, further research may be attractive considering the largely unexplored realm of populist Machiavellianism. My analysis has outlined how Mussolini and Trump, our two contemporary figures of study, have proven to be outstanding Machiavellian figures in the modern era, with their relationship to the populist authoritarian aspect of Machiavelli's writings. This connection found between the 16th century and the 21st certainly provides a very expansive area to investigate. I'm hopeful that the structure of this analysis within my paper may prove to be a strong foundation for further analysis into present and future populist authoritarian figures. My ambition for the broader impact of this work is that we may see a stronger understanding of political science, ideology, and political inquiry on a societal level, specifically by looking to the relevant past and building its connection to the future. It seems too often that history repeats a cyclical nature because there are too few who can recall the mistakes of the past, and none who have lived long enough to see those mistakes appear again. And as recent studies have shown a notable increase in vote share for populist authoritarian programs within the past 10 years alone, and given the renewed interest in politics that tumultuous governments tend to spark, it seems vital now that people take an equal interest into what a populist authoritarian may look like, what their characteristics are, and their strategies for amassing support. On that note, I hope that exposure to my analysis of populist authoritarian figures, as well as analyses like it, may broaden the general political intuition of those both politically active and inactive. Thank you.